Let's go around and I'm going to let you guys introduce yourselves. And also, since the first panel was on innovation and touched on a lot of what we were going to talk about, I'm going to switch it up and ask you guys almost completely different questions. So if you want to get started, Jake, maybe you can just tell us a little bit about what you do for Buzzfeed and how it relates to innovation.
Sure. My name is Jake. I head our partner innovation division. So we handle some of the innovation that happens internally, especially around commerce. And then we offer that as a service as well to our brand partners. So increasingly they come to us. They say, we understand our current customers. We don't understand the customers that we want to reach. And we help them develop insights and systems and products to meet with those needs.
Hi, I'm Fred. I'm with Coty. We're the third largest beauty company in the world. Own about 77 brands, many of which you guys know, from fragrances like Gucci, Burberry, Marc Jacobs, to Clairol, Sally Hansen, CoverGirl. Myself and my team, who are here today, we're responsible for bringing emerging tech, new digital platforms, in a consumer-facing manner to the market. So very much what all of our customers touch, see, and feel, and things they engage with to learn about products, to learn how to apply them, and so on. That is our sole focus.
Great.
I'm hoping this works. Yeah, I think it does.
Yes, better.
So my name's Connie. I'm head of marketing for digital services for Siemens Energy. It's now called Siemens Gas and Power. And in the energy sector, we've had more change in the last 5 years than in the previous century. So, the introduction of renewable sources of energy, people are generating their own energy and selling it back to the grid. So there's all sorts of things going on where a lot of our customers, who are often power generators, are really struggling to keep up with all of this. And innovation plays a big part in especially digital innovation and how they can do that.
Morning, folks. So my name is Raul Moas. I am the Miami Program Director for Knight Foundation. We are an endowed foundation that funds at the intersection of journalism, the arts, and certain communities where our founders once had newspapers. And so that funding takes the shape of social investments. And it's really kind of addressing the question of how do we bring informed and engaged communities to the forefront. We believe that's really essential to a healthy democracy. And on the outside, you might say a foundation, charity, they just give away money. We actually don't view ourselves as the typical philanthropy or philanthropic player. We calculate ROI in different ways. We look to engage audiences in different ways. And we look for sustainability and new products in different ways. So I think that's the tie-all here.
Yeah, that's great. So I think that we talk about innovation a lot as kind of this mystical unicorn, and some companies have it and some people have it in their title, but I want to kind of bring it back down to earth, and maybe we'll start with you, Raul. What do you do on a daily basis to cultivate a practice of innovation? And maybe that's creativity, maybe that's being savvy in your industry, but however you imagine that, what does that look like on a daily basis?
So I think personally for me, it's been somewhat of a journey getting here, but it's this notion of really making myself uncomfortable. And so I think I'm a creature of habit, we all are, but I really kind of retreat back to my habits, into my comfort zones, into what I know best. And I notice that if I do a week's worth of effort, of work, that's comfortable, I'm really worse off for it. And so I'll plan my next couple of weeks with meetings or interactions or experiences that are really outside of my comfort zone, and that in no way, shape, or form have anything to do with kind of what on paper, in theory, I should be doing. And then what I find is that after that, I'm looking at my challenges and my opportunities through different lenses entirely. I'm just better at what I'm doing. And so for me, it's very much taking myself outside of my comfort zone, outside of the space that you normally would think we'd be in or I would be in, into the most awkward situations potentially, but that tends to round me out and really kind of elevate what it is that we're seeing.
Anyone else? Connie?
I think that there's a couple things. The first is, and the other panel talked about, a culture of experimentation and failing fast, engendering a culture of curiosity, and also especially my company's been around since 1847, so they've had to reinvent themselves a few times. And starting with not, especially in a B2B business, not what are we selling or how, I heard some of the other panelists in the previous panel talking about how is this going to go in the market, but what is the raw customer need that we need to meet unconstrained by the current business model, and that often will sort of help unlock that innovative tendency or skill.
So what do you do to think about raw customer need, and how do you kind of pare back all of the kind of bottom line and revenue and marketing to get
you talk to a lot of customers, and that's where design thinking helps to come in. You also ask why a lot of everybody, including executives. Why are we doing that? Why would we keep doing that? And you cultivate what we call killers in the organization to guard against organizational bias. So people who come into a project for the express purpose of not tearing it down, but trying to see things always from the customer's point of view, and that.
Great. Jake?
Sure. So one of the things that was actually talked about by the last gentleman who had the stage was data, and how data is historic. And at Buzzfeed, we have a huge data set. You probably don't realize that we have about 9 billion interactions per month. We drive hundreds of millions in sales. And that creates a data stack that's so large you could find anything you want in it on any given day. The one thing that you can't find is an answer. And so we really focus on insights, on understanding, what's going on, what are the emerging trends, what could they mean, and then figuring out how to apply those either to our customers or to ourselves. And that's where a lot of our day is spent when we're not actually heads down sort of working on the task at hand.
So what does that look like in practice, right? You come up with lots of kind of crazy solutions for brands.
Yep.
And, I'm sure you can sit and pour through data, but on, a daily basis, what do you kind of do to stay ahead of the curve?
Sure. Well, so we have a fantastic insights team without whom I don't think we could do a lot of what we do. But we see our audience not as one audience. Millennials aren't one group. They're a collection of thousands and thousands of micro groups and different interests and competing needs and wants. And so finding the signal and understanding what is the signal is their job, and I don't know how they do it, but they bring it to us in really exciting ways, either based on questions that we ask or trends that they're seeing. And often it's the smallest ones that are the most exciting, not the largest. Because if things are really loud and really provable, then they tend to fall closer to what we'd call best practice, which means probably everybody knows about them. They're probably the things that are driving last year's sales and trends versus next year's, which is what we're most interested in.
You hire the right people.
We hire great people. We listen to them.
Yeah.
Raul said something interesting about being uncomfortable. I think what our group has to do, and I think any innovation group has to do in a company, is it's a few different aspects. I think the first thing is you have to serve as connectors to the rest of your company for what is going on in the market from a tech perspective, from a emerging platforms perspective. So part of it is taking the excitement we have and spreading that through the organization, and honestly making people uncomfortable. Not in a way where they run away, but in a way where people get excited about the things that we do and they realize it's okay to branch out of their sort of perimeter and their field of view. I think the second thing is we approach, we're essentially explorers, right? And we approach it from two different angles, which is, like you said, it's what is the consumer need that we're trying to fill. And I think, for our industry, it's a lot of problems that are not new. We haven't created new problems, we've created new tools to address them. So a lot of what we hear is it is becoming more challenging because there's a lot of proliferation in the market, both of technology, of brands. Shelf space is at a premium now. So we do have new challenges that face the old problems, which is finding out what's right for somebody, being educated enough around that product or that sector to understand exactly how it applies to them. And then the third thing is making sure they get the best use out of the product. And that's going to be a combination of not just applying it to your face or to your nails or whatever it is, but it's the services around those products. The flip side is going out there proactively and looking at what's on the market. I mean, I think venues like this where we get to meet new people, going out, talking to people that are developing new and interesting technology. And it's a bit of a matchmaking process, because if we come strictly from no one's going to say we need an AI engine that does X, Y, and Z in this particular period of time, because that's taking a very tactical approach to something, which may be right, but really what it comes down to is we've seen something that can achieve this, and we have to look forward, not just 3-6 months, we have to look forward a year or two and say, when this reaches maturity, this is going to solve a lot of problems that we have in the back of our head. So sometimes it's really about looking at something, trying to frame it in a context of what we're trying to solve, and then bring those things together. So on one hand, we are constantly tuned in to the organizational needs, specifically through the eyes of the consumer. On the other hand, we're constantly digging up rocks or going places and looking for things that are new and interesting and trying to figure out how to connect those things together.
That's great. So that really leads me to my next question. Up here we have media and energy and retail. And I would argue that right now the world and the business world is smaller, right? We're more connected. And I would say that businesses today win by collaborating rather than competing, and also looking across industries rather than staying in their narrow vertical. So, Connie, if you want to start, who are you looking at outside of your industry as a leader in innovation and a company or an industry that kind of helps shape and inform where you're moving?
Well, I think there's lots of different examples, and often, we talk about people like Amazon, or, companies like Amazon and Google, and who seem to just have such a beat. I remember Jeff Bezos once saying that 3 things that his customers will always want, is a great price, frictionless buying experience, and fast delivery. And so all of the innovation that they focus on centers on those 3 key needs, so that that need never changes, but the product does. So we use a lot of that kind of thinking in our own mantra. What is that need that will never change, but our products may to meet that need?
Raul, do you have?
Yeah, so I think that there's a really interesting kind of trend happening when it comes to digital transformation and legacy businesses that is fairly binary, right? I think you have these groups that have picked it up and said, this is really important to go beyond. There's a publicly traded kind of HVAC company here in Miami called Watsco, largest kind of wholesale distributor of HVAC parts. Not particularly sexy, if you would, right on the surface, just a lot of steel and other things. Watsco, years ago, realized that their industry was very kind of stagnant, and they were in a position to either lead or completely become obsolete within 10 years if they didn't touch the model. And the model was working great at that moment, so there was really no fire to do that. And what they've done is that they've gone out and they've actually started acquiring or building their own kind of ventures from within in a really organic, authentic way that is probably at some point in the coming decade or so going to displace their core business right now. And those ventures that they're building somewhat tangentially relate to this in some ways. To Connie's point, they kind of augment what they're doing right now, and some don't. Some are really kind of random mashups that are much more consumer-centric and less on the wholesale side. And so I think that it's a fairly binary kind of thing that we've seen. I think you're seeing more companies say, all right, we really need to rethink how we work with others, whether it's working with others under the umbrella of the company, right? That we're just actually enabling different teams to compete against one another in some ways, or we're actually reaching out across industries completely and bringing other partners to the table.
Great. What about you guys?
I would say there's a lot more to be learned out of your category than in. I think very often the snag corporations get in is it becomes very incestuous. We look at what our direct competitors are doing like that, right? That's not always the answer, because we all live in the same bubble. Break out a little bit, right? So when I think about what categories interest me, and I would say broadly above companies, is looking at things in diagnostics, medical. I mean, some people would say medical and pharma doesn't seem so hip, but there's amazing amounts of advanced technology coming out there, and you say, okay, how does that apply to beauty? Well, we touch parts of people's bodies that things like, topicals do and other things. So when we think about, okay, what are people doing in the skin diagnostic space? How are they looking at their overall health and how that manifests itself from an aesthetic standpoint? Those things apply to us because we're not cosmeceutical, so to say, but we kind of, some of our products verge on this, but I think what we look at is, for instance, in movements where there's a big push to create organic or all natural makeup or to create formulations for hair color that are chemical-free. These things are happening for a reason. It's not just trend. It's because people are becoming more conscious of themselves. And I think this started, I'd probably say about 6, 7 years ago with what they called sort of the, self-awareness or the quantified self. And it's continued now in a lot of different ways. So I'm really interested in what happens in the diagnostic community. I always look to fashion and apparel. I like things that are either closely tethered or proximate to people or closely tethered to culture. I think those two things are definitely relevant to us. And I'm also interested in what a lot of device and hardware manufacturers are doing. When you look at the Samsungs of the world, everybody knows them as phone or device makers, but it's interesting because if you think about it, each one of us has a phone in our pocket, glued to our butt, that never leaves, right? Who has more insight than a company that's making phones that sit in people's pockets? So we think about how they're advancing things and how they're creating new services around the device and bringing partners into the fold. That's really interesting for us. So
I think that's right on point. And Fred touches on this idea of kind of what we're seeing is kind of individualized customization. So going away from mass customization to individualized, personalized products. And I think that's a different way of branching out beyond your vertical. It's that you sometimes need to reach out to folks that have a different skill set, right? And so how does maybe a cosmetics player or anybody really at the table, how do they think about breaking down millennials between, it's not just a kind of an age demographic kind of bucket, it's actually really, really personalized. So if that's not something internally that you've got, then reaching out beyond sector agnostic, almost thinking of it as a skill set, who can help break down and kind of tap into that individualization trend?
So Buzzfeed has always sort of excelled and been built on helping people build identity and conversation around that identity. And one of my favorite examples is about 2 years ago when Facebook video started to take off. We really wanted to win at it, and we did a lot of experimentation to figure out what are the new conventions that we could start that would really be explosive on this platform. From that, the Tasty brand was born, all of those top-down cooking videos, right? So 24 months later, we had 94 million followers. That's more than Justin Bieber and Beyonce put together. And one of the ways that happened was we started using those videos not just as a mechanism to getting eyeballs, but as a way to facilitate conversation. So starting about 12 months ago, 9 in 10 Tasty comments involve tagging a friend, right? People are using this content as a way to say, this is important to me, I wanted to share this with you, and drive their personal connections forward that way. In terms of what's exciting and next for us with all of that, it's really interconnected retail. It's how to take that conversation and that experience from being something that happens digitally, where people are sharing and talking amongst themselves, to something that crosses over from URL to IRL, whether that's products or in the case of Tasty, they're actually cooking these things at home, they're changing their behaviors, they're changing their buying patterns. All of that type of stuff is really the frontier and is what's exciting us these days.
Great, thanks. So we're getting some questions from people tweeting, and Edmundo has a question for Raul that I actually have for all of you, which is, how do you measure success? What do your KPIs look like, and kind of how has that changed over time?
Sure. I think I'm going to answer the inverse of is how do we deal with failure? And that is to say that the power dynamics in our world are such that very few of our grantees, or even kind of when we invest, we've taken some dollars out of our endowment into a venture fund, so some of our portfolio companies, the power dynamics in that relationship are that no one ever really just wants to come to you and say, hey, that $1 million you gave us for that whatever program, we didn't hit any of the KPIs that we had set out in the grant agreement, right? Like no one ever just comes out and says that. And so I think what we are trying to do more and more of is celebrate honest failure, right? If you took the $1 million and ran, we got a problem, right? That's common sense. But if we learn something, if there's a really honest attempt at moving the ball forward in some way, shape, or form, then that's good. That's part of the cost of admission here, right? We got to be cool with it and be all right. I think to the question of success, each of our teams would look at it differently. We have a very strong journalism program that's doing a lot of work around digital kind of media and digital today. And so can we bring on new audiences? How do you retain those audiences? How does that work reflect the actual kind of spirit of the community? A lot of things that are quantifiable and a lot of things that are qualitative. And so we take a really kind of broad and expansive definition of our success. If it points us to informed and engaged communities, then we consider that a win. And if it doesn't, we're happy that we learned something that didn't work, that didn't get us to an informed and engaged community, right? I would venture to say that what we're seeing today in some of our funding work around social media is that not all social media makes us more connected, right? It actually increases in many ways the divisions that we have amongst us. And we're good with then elevating that and saying, hey, it wasn't a success, but we understood now what doesn't work and what shouldn't be replicated.
I mean, I think you said, what I like is you said that the approaches are, there's quantifiable things, qualitative things. I think that's absolutely true. I think where companies very often stumble on their innovation approach is twofold. It's, number one, looking at it very narrowly as, okay, this thing must be like these things. So what happens is we go in, we look at a new piece of technology, and we say, okay, this needs to level up the same way that we would do search engine marketing or we do traditional display advertising. It just doesn't work that way, right? In innovation, we very often, as all you guys agree, I'm sure, we're working ahead of or along with the curve of adoption. So what needs to happen is your KPIs, whatever they are, need to be commensurate with both the adoption of the technology as well as the maturity of it. Otherwise, what you're trying to do is measure something that is not mature yet and you don't have a lot of precedent for against things that you do. And this is very often why people look at it and say, oh, well, this is a failure. It's an absolute failure. We didn't sell 50,000 widgets or whatever it is that you sell. I think a lot of industries are guilty of that. CPG is very guilty of that as well, as it's very much a point A to point B. So a lot of the qualitative stuff in between is very often overlooked. And I think that the way we like to approach it is say, okay, let's not look at KPIs as an absolute, immutable thing. KPIs need to grow, they need to be phased, they need to be commensurate with the current state of the technology in the market. What that means is you may initially be measuring on a small scale with a modest data set. What is purchase intent? What is the likelihood that these consumers will adopt this technology as part of everyday life? What is the likelihood that they will look at this technology as something that plays into purchasing behavior? Some consumers sometimes don't want to buy things from certain places because they probably feel like they're being over-marketed to. So we find sometimes that our approach will be different. And so that's the first thing I think is to be realistic about what we're measuring at different points. And to gradually build that as you have more data to work with. I mean, I'm sure as you know, from an insights perspective, it's very difficult to say, okay, we don't have any data to work with, but we're just going to go, pedal to the metal on this. And if we don't sell 100,000 units, then it's an absolute fail. That's the worst way to do innovation. You will inevitably fail that way. What you should say is, let's take it step at a time. Let's look at what the behavior looks like from the consumer side. Let's test it. Let's do limited market release. Let's see what affinity looks like. If you can prove with a modest data set that there's about 25 to 30% increase in purchase intent, it's very easy to then take that data and scale that approach more carefully and reduce the risk over time. I think the other facet that is self-defeating is a fear of failure. And it's, Raul, I think you mentioned this as well, is we learn as much from failure as we do from success. What we have to do is be prepared for that. And in corporate life and in a lot of companies, people are not prepared for failure. They're like, we can't fail, all eyes on this. I'm like, if you go into it with that way, you're going to be scared, you're going to slip on the ice, hit your head, go home. And you have to be prepared to take those risks. Now, I'm not saying you take a ton of money and throw it into the fireplace. I'm saying be measured, be to a degree pragmatic about how you go out to the market, but also understand that you will fail. And failure doesn't always, it's not binary. It's always like, it's not always yes or no. Sometimes what failure is 45% of the mark What was the 55% that we didn't do so good at? That's an agile approach. Let's iterate on it. Let's build it. Let's take the data we have and understand why something didn't perform to 100%, and let's change that. And let's go out again, and let's test the damn thing until it works for us. And we have the right data then to make more concise investments as well as assign more commercial KPIs.
I agree with what Fred said.
Thank you.
Always. That's just baseline. Let's sell 100,000 units or 100 million is a surefire way to sort of get nowhere. It's very easy to measure that you didn't get there. The way then that we do measure success, especially with the partners that I work with, is we want to look closer. So we want to say in 5 months or 6 months, how would we know that we are en route to changing the business? And what we come up with are KPIs that are more directional, still just as measurable, but but more impactful on a timeline that can be incremental towards those big sort of industry shifting goals that we're looking for. Examples might be like one client who we work with a lot is one of the largest lawn care manufacturers on earth. They find that millennials aren't engaging with, lawns the way that their parents were, all this type of stuff. And
Millennials
so,
don't own homes.
what is it?
Millennials don't own homes.
Millennials don't own homes. It's not true. Let me just start with millennials is just like millennials XYZ is a recipe for lies and untruths. It's like earth shaking to me. I go to work and I'll hear from our clients, millennials, they're not getting married. They're all poor. You might be shocked to hear that millennials' first homes are larger than their parents' first homes were. They've waited longer to get that first home, but they're more prepared when they get there, and they're buying a first home that they think they're going to stay in longer. I don't know. You shook where I was going because the assumptions that get made about this audience are so broad. I know you were joking, of course.
Perhaps assumptions about all audiences are wrong.
Yeah.
Like not baby boomers and it's not just millennials that people generalize about, right?
Well, because generations aren't a real thing, right? They're construction.
Yeah, and I'm sure if we go back 40 years, right, people were going like, oh, these hippies, like what's that about? But at the end of the day, what everybody's saying is just, we need new customers. We need customer growth. And we're really good at servicing the customers that we've been servicing. We're really hard at connecting with the next customer.
And it's almost less about understanding the millennial and more about understanding the world they live in. There was a story this morning from New York Mag about 12 millennials on why they won't vote. And the kind of buried lead is that they don't know how to mail things. Right? I mean, look, we're in a different world. But lightning round question, last question. What is going to be the biggest innovation to disrupt our lives that no one's talking about, right? We talk about self-driving cars and AI and robotics. What are we missing?
From my perspective, I think it's batteries. So battery, if you think about the fact that we can harness energy from the sun and the wind at the moment, but we don't do a great job of storing that excess. So there's a lot of battery technology now, but IBM releases a report called 5 and 5, the next 5 things in the 5 years, and there's technology now where a battery can charge from the air, so it won't need lithium inside of it. And if we can do that, I think it's just going to change everything.
Wow. Raul.
I think so many folks are kind of tied up with like the buzzwords, and I think at the end of the day, the buzzwords mean nothing because they mean everything, right? I think I'd go back to kind of what I said earlier about individualized customization across the board, from the way my sneakers kind of fit and how they look and all that kind of stuff, to when I go to the doctor, I'm not going to get a probiotic. I'm going to get a probiotic that addresses whatever deficiencies my microbiome has in my gut, right? Like I think medicine, everything really is going to be so much more tailored to the moment, the place, the context, and that coupled with a decrease in price should mean that we see a very different landscape on a lot of different sectors.
Fred, go, quick.
I mean, at the risk of sounding trite and buzzwords, I think the proliferation of AI, it's something everybody's talking about, but I think very few people understand. And I think that's because we understand AI from a superficial marketing perspective very often, or what we see in a consumer-facing manner. But as computer vision increases, and I speak subjectively, that's going to change a tremendous amount because it is the backbone for everything from AR and face analysis and diagnostic to self-driving cars to everything in the workplace as well. And I would also say that segmentation is eventually going to dissolve. Whether that sounds controversial or ignorant, take your pick. But we're talking a lot about millennials, Gen Z, Gen X. So I don't think that's going to matter anymore because we're making the assumption that we could still put people into buckets. What's going to change is when we can't do that anymore because the consumer expectation is going to go leaps and bounds. So everything that we do has to be designed for that individual, down to the irregularity of one cheekbone, down to the probiotic side, down to everything. So I think AI is talked about a lot, but I think we've just scratched the surface. And the real exciting stuff is what's cooking in the various academic areas and research areas. The MIT and Carnegie Mellon. Those are the places where the cool stuff is boiling up. And by the time it makes it to us, that's I think we're going to see things really just kind of kick into gear.
Let's end with you.
All of those answers make a lot of sense. I think the thing that is most exciting to me is just around experience. I think all of these things that people are interacting with become commoditized when we know that we can sort of race to the bottom, that everything is available to us. And so I get most excited looking at how experience and emotion can be infused into every part of a sales funnel and an interaction.
Great. Okay, so look out for Buzzfeed to make you laugh, cry, feel lots of things. Thanks so much for all of our panelists and their great insights about innovation.